Welcome to the first plenary session of MINEX Kazakhstan Mining and Exploration Forum 2023. The session is organized under the theme, Creating a Favorable Business Climate for Sustainable Development and Investment in Kazakhstan's Mining Industry. Large foreign businesses contribute a third of all taxes in Kazakhstan. In 2021, tax revenues to the state budget increased by 25%, with the extractive industries experiencing the highest growth due to rising prices in global commodity markets. However, despite an inflow of 11.7% in foreign investment in the mining industry in 2022, growth in the sector decreased. Kazakhstan plays a crucial role in global mineral production. Today, we'll explore current trends, challenges, and opportunities in this vital sector. Together with renowned experts and senior government representatives, we will explore key challenges in creating a favorable business climate, and learn about measures to improve the investment climate in Kazakhstan's mining sector. We will also hear about innovative approaches to subsoil use management, and recent amendments to Kazakhstan's Code on Subsoil and Subsoil Use. At the end, we will delve into the potential opportunities and risks surrounding rare earth elements, and discuss the development of geological exploration amidst global energy transition. Join us in shaping the future of sustainable mining and fostering a favorable business climate in Kazakhstan's mining industry.
Dear Forum delegates, first of all, I would like to thank Ms. Katie Leach, the ambassador of His Majesty to Kazakhstan, and I would like to thank Mr. Artur Polyakov, the founder and the director of the MINEX Forum. This is the 13th mining forum in Kazakhstan. For Kazakh people, 13 years, it means a lot. We call it Mushiljas. The first 12 years, we believe that this is a childhood, but starting the 13th year, the person is recognized as a mature person, and I would like to congratulate the organizers of this forum with this anniversary, and I wish Artur to continue holding these events in Kazakhstan. We are active participants of this forum, and we would remind you about Kazakhstani Mushiljas to Artur and his team. We have a very interesting first panel session. We have 7 speakers in this panel discussion. We have 2 representatives of the government of Kazakhstan, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Vice Minister of Industry and Infrastructural Development. These are people that are dealing every day with these issues, how to attract investments to the country, and including investments to the mining sector. Also, we have the speaker from the EBRD. We have representatives of local and foreign service companies. And the first floor I would like to give to Mr. Eric Livny, the Deputy Director and the leading regional economist in Central Asia from EBRD. I know that Mr. Livny, he came to Astana just for the purpose of this meeting and this speech. I believe that his topic is very interesting. He will be talking about economic opportunities in Kazakhstan and other CA countries, and he will be talking about potential challenges occurring in these countries due to geopolitical situation. Mr. Livny, the floor is yours. Good morning. Can you hear me? I came from sunny Tashkent. It's not very sunny there. The weather changed very drastically in our region. Talking about macroeconomic weather, we'll be talking about that right now. Next slide, please. I will be talking about the situation in the region overall, and Kazakhstan as a part of this context. It will be more clear then to understand what is going on on. The slides will be in the English language, but I will be speaking Russian language. Okay, let's look at the economic growth figures for the last 3 years. And also, let's look at the forecast for the 2023. Actually, we can see a very positive situation. Kazakhstan is to the left on this draft, on this chart. The growth is slower than with other countries of Central Asia. But in general, the region so recognizes what is going on in Ukraine and COVID, which we forget almost. This region accepts it quite mildly, let's say. There is no recession observed in any of the countries. And in general, the growth is positive and somewhere is high. For example, Tajikistan, 8%, 7-something. Kyrgyzstan, small countries are growing quite fast. But let's have a look what is going on in details. Next slide. Why we are surviving this crisis quite calmly, let's say. Of course, Kazakhstan will have super revenues from oil production related to the high prices for oil, first of all. On this slide, you can see the share of mineral resources to GDP and other resources, including wheat, for example, because Kazakhstan is growing wheat as well. We can see that Kazakhstan has a great share of oil and wheat in GDP, but the prices for these resources increased a lot. What we can see lower in the chart, we can see the increase. The average weighted price of the last year, so it's higher than in comparison with 2021, and so on and so forth. The average weighted prices are higher for gas, for coal. For coal, the growth was 2.5 times. I don't know how to characterize it even more and how to describe it, what adjective to use. Next, this is the first reason why the economy is experiencing growth. Next slide. But what is important and interesting here is that trade activity expected by everyone will slow down, would slow down. It didn't slow down, actually, and we observe activation of trade in all the countries of the region. But please pay attention to Kyrgyzstan, your neighboring country. Great growth. So the light column, this is the growth of import in Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan started to export less of the gold, so that's why, because of the less export of gold, we can see minus in exporting. But all the other export categories are growing. It concerns all the other countries of CA. We can see the growth of export and import, and the increase is quite significant. And the trends for this year is the same. We can see the continuation of the high growth in trade. What's going on? Why trade is growing? Next slide, please. The first and obvious, as of now, reason is that Central Asia region and Caucasus, let me add here, is playing a significant role in intermediary trade between Russia and all the other world. But on this slide, you can see the red column. This is the export from Central Asia to Russia, red column. Kyrgyz Republic is the leader here, 160% of growth. What does it mean? It means 2.5 times growth of export to Russia. This is the biggest growth, but with lower volumes, but bigger volumes of exports. These are Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. They increase it not so much, but the the volumes are higher. So in Kazakhstan, we have 20% of gross of export to Russia. In Uzbekistan, 45% of export gross to Russia. And Uzbekistan is exporting. It's not only re-export. Actually, they are exporting a lot of their own manufacturing products, like home appliances, washing machines, and so on and so forth. Last year, I will not tell about that because I was told it privately, but there is a significant growth of export of own Uzbek products. In other columns, we can see the thin column. This is the import from China. So the green column, this is the growth of imports from Turkey. But not only these countries. Let's look at other slide. We can see the example of Germany. This is just one example, but actually it concerns all the EU countries and Great Britain including. We can see that from the one side we have the slowdown of export to Russia. So on my chart it's a gray curve, but this is the curve that is going down. This is the export to Russia, and so the curve going up, this is the export to Armenia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. The volumes are different. That's why this chart is not very correct, but the trend is very interesting. Let's look at another chart. This is the breakdown. Please have a look where export of German goods are going to. The leader is the faraway country, Kyrgyzstan. It's far away from Kyrgyzstan to Germany, as I think you have to go through Kazakhstan, maybe through China, I don't know even, but so we can see the German exports growth to Kyrgyzstan, then Armenia, and then Kazakhstan, and it's quite significant. We understand what is going on. Countries that are part of Eurasian Economic Union, they are intermediaries between the trade, in the trade between Russia and other countries of the world. The situation is quite okay, also related to the stability of the currency markets. There was a crisis. You can see this drop just after the start of the war, but then the currency's rates increased, and the currencies became more stable, and even tenge showed the positive trend for the recent months. Let's say even only Mongolian Tugrik is lagging behind, but I know that for the last 4 weeks we have good news about this, and there is a good stability about that as well. Let's go further.
And certain aspects, which is less true for Kazakhstan, but money transfer from abroad play a great role in the region. In some countries, it may reach 30 to 35% of GDP. Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, money transfers made 1/3 of the country's economies. So, in the beginning of previous year, the questions that we asked at the time, how the war may impact money transfers. The expectations were catastrophic. We expect significant drop down, but actually what is happening? We observe quite an opposite picture. We observe significant growth in money transfer. Uzbekistan has increased the growth of money transfer by 110%, not only from labor migrants. We see significant volumes of funds that comes from Russian companies and from Russian citizens who transfer money abroad. Some part of this money is settled at bank accounts, deposits. People start bank cards. Some part of this amount is used to fund trade operations. That is why we observe not only inbound but also outbound money transfers, both showing significant increase. And as for labor migration, we do not see any release. In Russia, the unemployment rate dropped because militarized economy set significant demand for workforce, and the demand for labor migrants has grown. Last year, 3.5 million labor migrants entered into the country. 90% of them come from Central Asia, 50% from Uzbekistan and one-fourth from Kyrgyzstan. And even from Kazakhstan, we have seen some inflow of migrants, and even we have seen 100% growth of labor migration from Turkmenistan to Russia. Actually, we observe significant demand, and migrants are coming in. We don't believe that it will be this process will be ended because, unfortunately, the war is still in process, and the demand for labor resources, especially for male labor resources, is still growing. What is the main challenge for all Central Asian countries? Not only it is a challenge for all, it is significant uncertainty due to certain parameters which impacts all of you present in this room. First of all, it is a policy of central banks of the leading world powers, richest countries of the world. If they still continue pumping money into global economy, we'll have one picture. If they refrain from that, from doing it, from their behavior in the most recent months, the results will be different. We don't know what is going to happen, but increase in interest rate recently resulted in bank increases, and we observe the drop in real estate market in leading countries like UK, USA, France. It is clear that central banks are restricted with this phenomenon, and they will not be able to keep on their policy because real economy is important for them, not only monetary economy. So these are the key backgrounds, the key issue for the nearest future of what is going to happen to funds, to the interest rates, to the supply of money, and that will identify the rate of inflation because inflation is a result of monetary policy, and inflation in Kazakhstan is partially related to internal domestic policy. It is quite high in Kazakhstan, and I'll show you an inflation slide. And it is also explained with domestic policy, giving out of money, increasing of wages. Kazakhstan was a leader last year among all the countries where we operate. It's about 40 countries. Kazakhstan was rated as the second in terms of increase of nominal wages. Who occupied the first place? Who do you think? It was Kyrgyzstan. You see the competition. On one hand, it is great. We observe the growth of nominal wages by 30 or 40%, but people have more money. They go to the shops. When people go to the shops, the prices are growing. So this dilemma is unavoidable. And another question, what is going to happen to raw materials and other commodities traded at global stock exchanges? So the situation depends a lot on what is happening with the money. The more money, the higher the prices. Less money, interest rates are high and the prices drop down. If you look at the right part of the diagram, you see green and red lines. These are interest rates of Europe and US. Money prices go up and commodity prices drop down. And well, so this is what we can see. And how the situation will develop, unfortunately, it's not up for me to decide. Unfortunately, those who are over the ocean have to decide it. And another slide, please. Now, you see that Kazakhstan is shown in the red line. Unfortunately, this country is a leader in terms of inflation rates. All the countries managed to overcome the rates. They have passed the peak of inflation a little bit earlier, maybe in the middle or in the second part of 2022, but still in Kazakhstan, inflation pressure continued during the whole year of 2022, but in the most recent months, in March, we observed some decrease. Why? Kazakhstan has too much money, and too much money has been given out during COVID pandemics, and this process continued in 2022. Different governmental problems, despite of policy of the National Bank as it has increased the interest rate, but still the National Bank printed out money and provided this to the government to provide to the citizens. As a result, inflation does not want to roll down, and only in the March we have seen some decrease. And one more slide, and maybe with this I will finish the situation in general. In terms of the reserves, we are checking the inflations and we are checking real economy sector, but it's important to understand what every country has a reserve. But the reserve has gold and currency, and these reserves of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan are significant. Uzbekistan, in terms of number of months, and you see this column, it shows how many months the country will be able to pay for its import. Uzbekistan is higher than all other countries. About 17 months, it guarantees its payments for based on currency and gold resources. Kazakhstan's period is 11 months, and Kazakhstan's reserves grew by 3% in previous year. That inspires. In general, the situation is good, and the region shows very good picture. And Tajikistan significantly increased its reserves, even though we had some fears about the situation in this country. But also then, and also due to the high growth, we see the decrease in debts as a share of GDP, and you see the diagram to the right, and it shows that the state debt is decreasing. So this is the situation, and I described it, and I have some more slides, and I'll stop with it. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, you are welcome to ask them. Eric, thank you very much for interesting presentation, and I would like to request technical team to provide the results of voting during welcoming coffee break. Delegates of forum voted on what other factors have the biggest impact on investment attractiveness of Kazakhstan. Before we see the results on the screen, the first factor with the biggest impact is political and social stability. The majority of delegates voted for this factor. The second and the third place is shared by the issues of discovery of new deposits and successful examples of foreign companies implementing projects in Kazakhstan. And nobody voted for development of biggest projects in mining sectors. Taxes appeared also very relevant. And with this topic, I would like to say that Minister of Foreign Affairs since 2019 got responsibility for implementing of state policy in investments. If you remember, Committee on Investment, previously it belonged to Minister of Industrial Development, and since 2019 it became a part of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And yesterday I have seen two interesting aspects at this website of the committee. Last year, the government focused on strengthening the apparatus of investment ombudsman. Even Prime Minister will deal with the strengthening of the role of support to foreign and domestic investors in Kazakhstan. And another aspect that appeared interesting for me is a single window principle for investors implementing the investments in Kazakhstan. I would like to provide the floor to Almas Aydarov, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, who will be talking about investment capacities of the country, in particular in mining and metallurgy. Thank you, Almat. Good morning, distinguished colleagues, guests. I'm happy to welcome all of you at this forum. A month ago, I met with many of you at Canada, also at Mining Forum, and it was also a snowstorm like we have experienced in the most recent day. Maybe mining forums should be better scheduled in winter than in spring. You see, Astana cannot get warmer, but for me, the previous speaker was talking about current situation in Kazakhstan, and it's not a secret. So this past years appear very difficult. COVID-19, internal crisis, situation in the Ukraine, all this creates new challenges for us. But despite of all of that, our investment statistics is growing very well, and during the most 7 or 8 years, we are attracting up to $20 billion to Kazakhstan. The exclusion was only 2020. It was a COVID period. The investment made $17 billion, but now we are capable to attract $28 billion this year in 20. But you see, we see the significant difference in structure of investment, but the structure is more important for us than the quantity of investments. In oil gas sector attract, as well as money sector attracted a lot. In 2010, they could even have 60 to 70%. Now 43% is a sector, and we see the share of trade and processing industry up to 20% of total investments. And depending upon these trends, and we are developing our policy with regard of providing support to certain sectors. And most recent sectors, we see that mining sectors, subsoil use should not enjoy some preferences. And we, as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, disagree with that. We support the idea that the mining sector should become our basic sector and take significant share of investments. Even without oil and gas, it takes about 20% of investments. So, and it was discussed today, and Mr. Ambassador discussed today that Kazakhstan is developing a new tax code and encouraging the mining sector to take active part in its development. So as we provide share provisions with regard of mining sector. And we know that subsoil use tax has changed in most recent years, and these changes were significant during a very short period without long period of adaptation for companies. It happened. By the way, we as a Ministry of Foreign Affairs sign investment contracts mostly for processing sectors and make them free of tax for several years. This year, in the beginning of this year, with the request of our big subsoil users, we introduced a new tool for current and for new subsoil users, for everyone who are willing to fix tax rates for subsoil use, excises, and environmental duties. This is possible if the company within 10 years and its capex exceed $500 million USA, then within this same 10 years will fix the rates of subsoil use tax. The tax can be fixed in two sides. If you see if you have a growth, you'll remain at the same level, and if the tax grows, you'll keep your rates that you are signed for. Now, together with ERG, we are working on several contracts, and I believe that Kazminerals and other our big players will follow us. But in the new tax code, we would like to have more predictability so that the market could be adopted. I believe that the minimum period of changes should be 3 to 5 years, and announcement in 3 or 5 years should be done so as a company who are developing their financial model could be capable to adapt it to further use at their projects. In general, in mining sector, you know that in Kazakhstan we have a lot of transnational companies.
In terms of investment attraction, our policy of our ministry, we are just the implementers of this policy. But what we can see from our point of view, there were a lot of licenses in the hands of the players, but they were not doing anything. And now we are working on that. Our colleagues from the Ministry of Industry and the Infrastructural Development, they will elaborate on that. But for us, what is important, we don't want these deposits to be just commodities. We want them to use and utilize those deposits. We want these deposits to belong to those companies that we explore and use it later and extract from them later. Also, we mentioned that rare earth metals are available in Kazakhstan. Those metals are used in nanotechnologies, but we do not have a real picture about these metals. We can see that we have them, but we do not have exploration, great exploration about those metals, what we can extract and sell. We don't have the clear picture about that. The private sector probably will not be able to cope with that on its own. Maybe we need a serious state program, how we can stimulate, motivate the exploration of rare earth metals. In general, we are in favor for the following. The access to the deposits should be simple, clear, understandable, but with the certain liabilities for the investors. If the investor comes, there should be an access and clear and easy access to these deposits. But in any case, these deposits should be returned to the government and to the market, turnover in the market. The whole world is working on this principle, Australian method and so on and so forth. We are still having difficulties about that. Our codes are being updated all the time, but it's a peculiarity of all the countries. But our wish, if you're working with the investors, please, we want these rules on acquiring deposits to be clear and simple. The colleagues were talking about the current situation, financial indicators of Kazakhstan. It's not a secret that all this situation about sanctions against Russia, of course, it means that many of the companies are coming from Russia to us. Now we are working about 400 foreign companies. They officially announced that they are leaving Russian market. Those companies that cannot stay in Russia anymore, but they want to keep their presence in the Eurasian market. And we, as the nearest neighbor, biggest economy in Central Asia, 70% of the investments are still coming to Kazakhstan. That's why those companies are choosing Kazakhstan as the destination country. We are not providing any special conditions for those companies. We believe that those conditions that we have as of now, they are quite satisfactory. So we are not dividing between foreign and domestic investors. Foreign companies that are coming to Kazakhstan, they have to establish legal entity in Kazakhstan. We are not interfering into the proprietary rights, but as a legal entity of Kazakhstan, we are treating them equally, no matter whether it's a foreign or domestic investors. That we are doing exceptions for some companies that are providing certain best practices to legislation of Kazakhstan. If we can see that these are the trendy, then, for example, Carlsberg company, they have their plants in Kazakhstan, but certain drinks, beverages, for example, zero alcohol beer, they were producing it in Russia, but they wanted to start producing it in Kazakhstan. But there is a prohibition in Kazakhstan. We are not allowed to produce alcohol-free and alcohol beer in one line. But now, Carlsberg, they are using patented filters and others. That's why using one line, we can produce both types of beers. We understand now that we are lagging behind in terms of regulations about that. So that's why we are favoring this kind of investors and these companies that are coming to Kazakhstan. Because there are certain examples about that in pharmaceutical industry and so on and so forth. If we see some gaps in legislation, impeding the attracting of the investments, we are ready to consider it and demand it. I know that in the mining sector, I know that all the big projects, they are quite unique. It's very difficult to use this principle, one size fits all. That's why we are favoring flexibility in choosing the tools, especially if we are talking about attraction of big players to Kazakhstan. We now, as the ministry, we are discussing and we want to initiate the application about the investment agreement, so we can use it starting with 50 billion. But we have certain blacklist products like excise products and also subsoil users. They are not part of this investment agreement. But in my opinion, big subsoil users, if we are talking about $300, $400 million, it's just indicative figures. But if deposits that are not allowed to build a bankable model, if you are talking about poor deposits or with low concentration or big field, then we have to choose another model and give the opportunity to these subsoil users to sign this investment agreement with the most optimal model for the company to become profitable, at least to support them for the first 5 or 10 years. We will inform the market. I know the big players. I know half of the room here. We are working with you. Talking about ombudsman, it was mentioned. We are discussing it. Investment ombudsman. He is the prime minister, but he is overloaded. He cannot pay attention to specific cases. So that's why we introduced the deputy investment ombudsman, the minister of foreign affairs, the deputy minister. They will be the deputy ombudsmen on investments, and we'll establish also the task force under these deputy ombudsmen. They will respond timely to resolve these specific issues. We are talking about labor migration, attracting labor force, customs issues, because the supply chains, because of COVID and the sanctions against Russia, these supply chains are changing drastically. So that's why we setting up this task force of ombudsman. We will be the working body for that. And also we have Kazakh Invest, national company. It's a one-stop shop window, one-stop shop, and at the regional and national level, they have subsidiaries, and then we can find the information about situation and what is going on with the investors. Lots of changes. I will not take much of your time, but if you have specific questions, I'm ready to answer them. Thank you. Next, we invite the Ministry of Industry and Infrastructure Development. I believe this ministry recently has survived changes, digitalization, rights for subsoil using, monitoring of the implementation of the contract conditions, terms and conditions. All these issues are being discussed, e-auctions. And now I would like the floor for the keynote to the Vice Minister of Industry and Infrastructure Development, Mr. Ran Sharhan. Hello. Thank you. Thank you, the members of the forum. Welcome to the forum. I'm glad to see you at the 13th Mining Forum. Let me welcome at this next Mining Forum. At the beginning of my speech, I would like to tell that the attraction of the investments, this is the key for us, and we'll do everything possible to provide and to establish favorable conditions for investments in our sectors. Kazakhstan is the leader, as you know. For example, tungsten, it's the first place. In 2017, we conducted the legal reform. We developed the new code, and we are implementing it starting this year. Because of these reforms, so what we can see the spike of the companies, pioneers, juniors in the market. We have set up more than 17 of junior companies that are effectively exploring in our country. We have issued more than 2,000 licenses for exploration starting 2017, and the share of the junior companies is more than 90%. Talking about the accessibility and opening of the fields for the exploration and extraction, we have opened all the territories for subsoil use. It's 1.6 million square kilometers. The recent changes in the public assets management to 200,000 square kilometers were added because of that, and we will start to receive applications to explore these areas, newly added areas, starting 1st of September this year. For the subsoil users that would like to explore using their own equities, we know that government wants to help that, and that's why we are exploring the subsoil minerals using government means and funds to help the potential investors as well. Some of the reforms in the area of geology, you are well aware about them. For example, the Committee of Geology merged to the Ministry of Industry and Infrastructural Development. It allowed us to consolidate all the information about subsoil minerals and we are able to make decisions on every site. We renewed the inspectors' staffing to monitor the activity of subsoil users and improving the government control. The National Geological Service was established. We hope very much. We have great expectations for this service that will help the access to the geological data. To attract the investments to the greenfields. Due to that, starting March of this year, we are going to conduct e-auctions. That's why please take part in these e-auctions. We prolonged the application process until the 5th of May, and there will be a pilot of e-auction very soon. Colleagues, I mentioned that we have conducted certain reforms. The code was developed, approved. It's great, but we are not stop at that. We have some limited factors, impeding factors, impeding the development of the sector. The head of the country mentioned that we need to simplify the procedures for licensing and acquiring rights for subsoil use, and we need to make these processes more transparent, implementing digital solutions. Starting November last year, that's why starting November last year, we using the platform MineralGov. So we piloted the e-licensing module, and the investors have an opportunity to use this online format and can find the information about the 30,000 of geological reports. And also we introduced the module on e-notification. By the end of the year, we will amend the code, subsoil code. You were all facing barriers in receiving the rights for subsoil users. For example, authenticity of the documents issued in 2 languages. They were not authentic. Sometimes we have to update the requests because the Russian and English and Kazakh documents, they were not in line. We know all these things and challenges, and we are going to introduce amendments to improve this situation by the end of this year. We can hear a lot of questions from subsoil users about the increased collaterals to ensure the activity of subsoil users. If we are talking about big sites for subsoil use for exploration, it means that a big amount is being frozen for collateral purposes. So that's why, due to this fact, at the working group meetings, we are ready to discuss this, how to establish proportional collateral and how we can decrease this collateral amount at the same time to ensure the exploration activities. Talking about environmental issues, we know that you are facing these challenges to agree the environmental issues. We have the agreement already with the Ministry for Ecology. Together with this ministry, we are ready to address these barriers and remove them. I would like to welcome you at this forum again. This kind of events is an impetus for further development of the sectors. We are doing everything possible to remove the existing barriers, establishing the favorable climate for investment.
Very much, Iran Senhanovich. You have provided very inspiring initiatives, and you respond to many questions that will be raised in previous presentations. The next law is provided to Timur Adilov, one of the developer of a subsoil code, partner of Holler Lomax, and he will also share the ideas on how we can improve the business climate in mining sector. Thank you, Almat. Good morning, distinguished colleagues and friends. Thank you for the invitation. The ideas on how to improve the situation will come from what I am going to talk about. But I decided that I will be sharing with you the information on which we are not talking much. And we will have to accept and respond in time for particular challenges. But we'll start with the best. Please switch on the first slide. We have to note that Kazakhstan is a based mining jurisdiction in CIS, and we have no doubts in it in CIS and in Central Asia, maybe, and in the entire Asia. I hope we have particular successes after the reform, and we understand that we observe significant demand for geologists. It means that geological exploration in Kazakhstan is developing. We observe significant growth in importation of equipment, drilling rigs for dozens, hundreds, and we observe significant growth in investments. And we can also state that the areas covered with licenses before and after reform significantly increased. We are talking about the areas covered with geological exploration, but something is going wrong. In terms of Fraser Institute rating, in terms of investment attractiveness, we dropped significantly. We now rated as 65, but in 2017 we were 24th. Actually, we were the best jurisdiction in. We yield only to Canada, Finland, and some states within USA and to Australia. Where is the problem then? Please, next slide. The problem is significant uncertainty, and the course of the reform is also an issue. Last year, together with the colleagues of the World Bank, we made diagnostics of the sector and we carried out a lot of interviews. And what did we find? One of the key or the most problematic challenges is the staff in the administration. Unfortunately, we have to admit that 20 persons in the subsoil use department, which is responsible for 2,000 subsoil use objects, is impossible. All of you face red tape. You wait for application notifications for months, and you have to understand it. And we assure our clients that, guys, they do not have enough staff. Please wait, and you have to be patient. But the situation cannot last so long. The industry have to demand the state apparatus to be saturated with staff from point of view of competences and numbers. Quite recently, we have visited Canada. Only in the Ontario state, 65 persons work in subsoil use department. In Kazakhstan, we have only 20. We need 3 or 4 times more people because it is impossible to cover the sector having only 20 staff. It's physically impossible. I believe that the industry must demand the government to be saturated with the staff. We cannot keep on reducing staff in the key sectors that is responsible and attracting investments to the country. And again, we have the issue of understanding of business is very important. When we are having working groups and we are discussing things like arsenic is not a problem during mining. So these are some of the opinion, but it is really a problem. It is a huge problem. And regulator and state authority should understand it is both commercial and environmental problem. This is what prevents us from developing the deposits. I believe that the business must get united and help the regulating agency in improving its competences, but not demand only amendments to the law all the time. carry out workshops, conferences, improve the knowledge, closed sessions. This is important because this is a key part, because the quality of regulating agency and understanding of your business by the regulating defines the prosperity of a business in the future. Functions. Actually, we have to admit that the government and governmental institutions are moving in different directions. The amendments made last June in taxation law proved that the Minister of Industry is carrying out a reform. Minister of Foreign Affairs travels abroad, brings investors, attracts and say them, come to Kazakhstan. As the Minister of National Economy, Minister of Finance, increased taxes by 30 or 50% in a month. It seems to me that agencies and the government do not have good communication, or they are follow only their agency interest. Tax committee is interested in collecting taxes, but nobody is thinking that this increase in tax rates have significant impact on taxation base, that some deposits will not be developed because of that. State control. We understand that state control is a problem nowadays. Why? And you should not be scared that the state will increase the level of control, because poor control results to the prosperity of unfair or gray business. The companies that are compliant with environmental requirements, liquidation of consequences of subsoil use, invest money, they will get in a worse position than those who do not do anything and do not spend, but their business is prospering. But actually, it is the issue of fair competition, and state control is very important in this regard. But as for business community, actually we have to admit that in the most recent year, in the business community, I observed the fight for privileges, which is not clear for me. Someone are getting preferences, and big business say you provide preferences to smaller businesses, but who will pay for that? And this is the wrong model of behavior. Business community should be consolidated in the current conditions and help also to the regulating agency and to the government and explain what is required to be done. And we observe corporate egoism, which is booming. The companies have to understand that the request for justice in the society is extremely important nowadays. If we put too much pressure, it would mean that tomorrow the community would express dissatisfaction and exercise pressure on politicians, and politicians will do opposite reform and will carry out opposite to reform legislative policy. It may happen, and you observe it in the western region of the country, in oil and gas sector, and we can get a similar situation in mining sector. It is impossible to increase the pressure all the time and change the policy for lobbying personal interests. On top of that, everything should be fair. That was the key aspect of reform: fair competition and no any other ways. I'll show you visually to which extent this reform is fragile. It is impossible to amend the law all the time. The company should decrease their appetite with regard of amendments to the law. All these amendments should be systemic, and they have only to improve but not cover personal and individual interests. And if it says that constructual conditions, this is the subsoil use condition in the contract, you cannot change them if you are not satisfied with them. And in the lower part, you see legislative regulation. The next slide, please. Those institutional factors I was mentioning. So what could be the result of them? On one hand, the sector feels pressure from political and social situation. On the other hand, those institutional challenges I have mentioned have also the impact and the worst scenario of what may happen. We can reject discussion only even transition to royalty will have planned economy, planned taxation, subsoil use tax, and so on. And we'll never leave this virtual circle. From information area, I see some signs of nationalism in the policy, and there are some discussions. Let us share some deposits, or maybe somewhere, maybe we should return this principle of rational comprehensive use of subsoil. This is a principle that appeared in 1924 in Soviet Union, 100 years ago, and the situation at the time was absolutely different. What does it mean? If tomorrow the investors, those who is even the investor attracted by Minister of Foreign Affairs, have even a second doubt that his property, his subsoil use right, tomorrow will be reduced or shared or withdrawn, or he can be pushed to mine unprofitable part, or even he has a little doubt, its smallest doubt, that the products will be limited for export, we will get not only the outflow on investors, we'll have to forget about geological exploration, because people turn to geo-exploration to find and mine something. These are the factors of the same chain, the links of the same chain. We will not get the transition to critical. 5 years have passed, but we are still discussing JKZ standard, Soviet standard. It's unbelievable, actually. We are discussing how to reform geological service. And we have to admit, during 25 years, I think we'll hardly find the company that has used the results of state geological survey of subsoil in the most recent years. How it has impacted the sector? Has anyone used the fruits of state geological exploration service? Nobody. It means that we have to reform the role of state geological service. Quite recently, we discussed it with the National Geological Service in USA. We asked them particular questions. Do you do exploration? They say no. And by what do you do? We do not have any regulatory or control functions. We support businesses via information and science, and that's all. We have been moving to the situation for 5 years already. A committee of geology is moving between the ministries, and we have to make step forwards. We cannot stuck, otherwise we'll have absolute uncertainty, and the investors will have doubts that the state is capable to do the reform and finish it. That's all with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Timur, for very interesting presentation. The next floor I would like to give to the advisor, NPP Atomican, Mr. Jandos. I remember Jandos, at the end of last year, we had a call and we discussed the increasing met rates, and you mentioned the idea subsoil development as a driver of economic growth in Kazakhstan. And your speech today is about that. Yes, you're quite right, Almat. Dear participants of the forum, first of all, let me thank the organizers My name is Zhandos Abishev. I'm the advisor for the chairperson of the National Chamber of Entrepreneurs at Amican. Also, I'm the head of the task force on mining complex development. Several words about the work of our chamber. Recently, during the last year, we established this task force, including the SMEs, experts, distinguished colleagues, former heads of the governmental bodies. We are working actively with the committee, sectoral committee, subcommittees on geology and other areas. All these committees of our chamber are working actively now. Last year, we initiated the Council of Local Entrepreneurs. There was a meeting devoted to the development of the mining sector in Kazakhstan, chaired by the Prime Minister. There were a lot of issues discussed, and just to mention that in our chamber we have a very active sectoral association, a mining association. So the SME association was established, and we have advanced in other areas as well. We are members of the different working group and task force in the Senate, Majlis, ministries, other sectoral ministries. Just some introduction as well, some background information. Actually, I have been participating in MINEX conferences and starting in 2010. I missed only one or two of the MINEX forums probably, and I'd just like to tell the following. Do you remember those years? There was an economic boom development, so we had great oil revenues, and we all were thinking that now the mining sector would become the second driver for our economic development. Rio Tinto, Anglo-American, Vale from Chile, and other companies, they were visiting Kazakhstan at those times. But now this boom, because of the geopolitical situation, because of COVID, we cannot observe this boom anymore, this spike anymore. Now we are kind of the transition period. We have the national programs in Kazakhstan, and we all understand that this sector is very crucial for our country, for the economy of our country, and maybe we have some new opportunities opening for us in this sector as well. I will not criticize much because the previous speakers mentioned a lot about those things, but Class A deposits were not discovered for the last 30 years. Fraser Institute rating, we'll talk about that, but according to Bloomberg forecasting, by 2030, so the metal demand increased by 10 times. Some of the, for example, copper demand will increase 10 times. So that's why Kazakhstan has a certain share in the world production of metals, ore concentrates, and others. Have to think about that. If by 2030 we will not develop this sector, we will lose our share in this market, because this niche will be undertaken by other countries, those countries that have some programs that the mining sector is priority in those countries. That's why I will raise the issue, and this issue is fundamental not only for this sector, but for the economy of Kazakhstan in general. Talking about this topic, creating a favorable business climate for sustainable development and investment in the mining industry, I would like to focus your attention on the strategic issue, whether we, government, sector, industry, is considering it as this sector as a driver for the economic growth and prosperity of people of Kazakhstan. Look at the slide. Kazakhstan, we are the 9th largest territory in the world, and this is the natural benefit for us. For other countries that are not landlocked countries, the sea access is the benefit for us. Our size is the benefit for us, and and the minerals should become the most important thing for the further development of the country. You know the significance of minerals for our country. The minerals is about 85% of export. It's more than 90% of revenues to the national fund and 50% of the government budget. The importance of the mining sector for the economy of Kazakhstan. This sector ensures 20% of GDP of the country and more than 1/3 of the value-added cost of the industry of Kazakhstan. And 3 of 10 staff of the industrial sector of Kazakhstan, they are working in the mining sector. It's about 200,000 of jobs in general. At the same time, those fundamental factors leading, it was mentioned, leading to the long-term reduction for the carbons. At the same time, it means the increased demand for the minerals. What are these factors? For example, we are shifting to e-vehicles, development of renewables, renaissance of the nuclear energies, the increased production of different gadgets. It means the increased demands in different metals. I mentioned it several times already. So that's why we are sure that if we have the strategic development plan for minerals development as a part of the mining sector, the increased revenues from the extraction of minerals will replace the losing revenues from the oil sector. So the minerals have a very strategic significant importance for our country, but at the same time, in the existing planning system of the country, there is no mentioning in the plans of the country, in the national plan of development, in the national priorities, there is no concept for the industry development. There is no mentioning of minerals in any national plans or documents. But at the same time, the documents of the state planning system, this is a holistic system, and the need and the legality of the development of the lower level documents. So it means that there should be a high level document developed first, but there is no such a document of high level for the minerals and for the mining sector. Last year there was a referendum on amendments to the constitution, and one of the main amendments was that the minerals belong to the peoples of Kazakhstan. We propose that it shouldn't be just this statement, but to support these amendments, we propose to develop the national priority development of the minerals as a driver for the economic growth and improving the well-being of the peoples of Kazakhstan, including it in the national plan development plan of Kazakhstan. Next slide. The main goal for the development of the national priority for the mining sector, it should be this document should become an impetus for the development of the mining sector as the new old driver for the economy of Kazakhstan for the nearest decades. Agreement, liquidation, environmental problems, all these factors were mentioned, and they would be mentioned several times more. I will not elaborate on that, but I would like to pay attention to this wheel, let's say, or circle, the issues raised by the subsoil users, no matter foreign or domestic ones. They are being addressed by different agencies and ministries. Okay, we are talking about one-stop shop established in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs by foreign investors, but the same one-stop shop should be established for the domestic investors, taking into account the development of junior junior companies. That's why if we develop this national priority for the mining sector, if we develop this document, then many of the issues being raised by years and decades addressed during negotiations business addressing these issues with local authorities, ministries, and others. But if we have this national document for mining sector, then these issues will be resolved automatically, let's say, at different levels. National and regional ones. Actually, we are proposing very simple KPIs in terms of minerals. Since we are the 9th largest country in the world, we should be the 9th country in terms of revenues from the mining sector and metallurgical industry. And also the cost of per square kilometer for geological surveys and exploration industry. Not to speak too long, these goals that we are setting are very clear. Stakeholders at the central level that we are proposing to include, you will have the presentation, and this is the first page with our goals and stakeholders and expected outcomes from the development of this plan of the national priority for so that the minerals become the drivers for the economic growth. The stimulating role of the taxation, expanding the opportunities for the growth and development of SMEs, increasing the metallurgical and petrochemical processing, and so on and so forth. This presentation was developed by our expert group of our chamber. We have been developing it for more than 1 year, but we are also targeting specific cases. This week we are going to meet with the Vice Minister in charge of our activities, and we'll address the specific cases specifically. But this presentation is devoted to the global issues. At the end, I would like to tell the following. The head of the state, when the first parliamentary session was opening, he mentioned that the economy of Kazakhstan still depends on the extraction activities. Then the president mentioned that we have our competitive advantages at the world market, and we should use those advantages to resolve current issues. That's why this sector needs to be developed. And also the president mentioned that during the last years there have been unprecedented geopolitical environmental changes and shifts. Due to that, several strategic documents became outdated. So that's why we need to review all the development strategies for Kazakhstan developed up to 2050. This strategy, development strategy for 2050, should become the main document identifying the priorities important for the development of the country, taking into account geopolitical changes. And we believe that the minerals are mentioned 3 times in the development strategy 2050, but we need to update this, and we need to bring this mentioning of the minerals to the next level. The sectoral development programs was over in 2014. It means that the sector is being developed without strategy for 9 years already. We, as the National Chamber of Entrepreneurs, with the sectoral ministry, with the support of other central governmental bodies, we can help a lot. We are engaged in the development in drafting of the new tax code, but as the chamber with sectoral associations, we also set up a working group and we have different working groups on drafting the tax code, including the task force on the taxes in the minerals in the mining sector.
The same we can do with the development of the sectoral reform and with the establishing of comprehensive plan for the sector development. We have reached good understanding with bigger businesses, and the bigger businesses is requesting us to develop this program. Sectoral associations, medium and small business, all of us are interested in clear, digitalized text of the strategy to avoid previous situation. We want to have modern document working on dashboard when the red lights appears when some parameters are violated. So, summarizing, I would like to say that many problems of the sector will be resolved not because the business requests or demands it, but because if we have the KPIs that we have been mentioning, then we will cascade to line ministry, environmental ministry, state revenues committee, minister of finance. Then the issues of development raised by business will be perceived our government and ministries and resolved because we'll turn to a KPI. If we are rated as 64th, our task will be to return to the place 24th place and then to be included into the list of top 10. Then, if we have these KPIs, and it will be clear that they are not fulfilled, then the barriers will be removed automatically. But now we still to please do this or do that. It's not always work, but I have to repeat that we have very close contact with line ministries. But to resolve global strategic level issues, we understand what is national priority, and it is in the interest of all of us and line ministries also. Actually, this is our only way. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that my presentation was interesting. Thank you very much, Andoljan Turich. The next topic is rare earth elements. It is a quite interesting topic. These are the metals for new technologies. You see, mid-last year, there were two big news from the United States and from EU. They showed significant interest to develop cooperation with Kazakhstan in the format of Kazakhstan EU, Kazakhstan US on mutual exchange of investment opportunities in the sphere of REEs. And in Kazakhstan also, despite of certain level of study in it, we still have issues with technologies and attracting investments. I would like to provide the floor to Mike Beer, Director of Corporate Consultant of SRK Consulting, on the topics of opportunities and risk of REE projects in Kazakhstan.
Gentlemen, I'm going to say a few words about rare earth elements. And I've got a few slides here that I'm going to use to emphasize a few points about this very sort of hot topic that's emerged in the last few years. Next slide, please. There's quite a group of them, and that's one of the key features about rare earth elements, is that there's actually 17 of them. There's 15 in the main lanthanide series, plus there's yttrium and scandium that sort of fit on each end. So there's a great number of these elements, and they all have quite similar chemical properties, and we'll come more onto that in a minute. And I think it sounds obvious, and it's in the title, they are rare. They're quite abundant in the Earth's crust, but economic deposits of them are relatively small in number, and quite often we see them as byproducts. So I'll take you through a few more points about that. Now, if we look next at applications, next slide, please. There's two states in which they're typically used. One is like as a pure metal, a metallic state. The other is an oxidized state. I'm not going to go through all the multiple uses here, but the key things that we will see that they're used for is the metallic ones are used in magnets and motors, and that's a huge market, particularly electric motors. There's been quite a lot of discussion about magnets in electric motors. Elon Musk said recently that he could produce magnets without rare earths, and I don't think there's any evidence at all to support that claim. But it was about a week before he was due to have a meeting with a load of his major rare earth magnet suppliers. So I think he was probably just wanting to negotiate the price than actually make a statement about where the technology's at. Although when I was at a recent conference about rare earths, there were speakers saying that if there's anyone who can make a magnet without rare earths, Elon Musk is probably the person who will end up doing it. Next slide, please. Now, if we just look at the players in this game, and of course, as everybody knows, it's all about China. And it's not just the reserves, the deposits they have, it's actually the production and the refining. And that is the most critical part of these elements, is the refining capacity. And as we'll see on some of my future slides, it's not just about where they're produced, it's about where you have the capacity to turn them into the useful things we need, because it's not very straightforward. If we look at the geology now, next slide please. Now there's essentially four main deposit types that we see them in hard rocks and carbonatites. We see them as byproducts in mineral sands, particularly in monazite. We see them in iron absorption clays, near surface deposits, highly weathered. There's one of those here that one of the companies active in Kazakhstan is working on at the moment. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. And then there's alkaline rocks, and they all have different features in terms of size and grade. And if we just move on and have a look in a bit more detail, next slide please, at these deposit types and the relative size of them and the grade. Now, here is a very key point when you're looking at these deposits, and I'll keep coming back to this, is they're quoted in rare earth oxides. They're all lumped together. It's a bit like saying, I've got a metal deposit and it's 5% metal, but you're not telling anyone whether it's copper or lead or tin or zinc or gold or whatever, right? So it's, when someone quotes a deposit as being 1,000 ppm rare earth oxides, you don't know what it is. It could be any one of those 17 elements that I've talked about, and you don't know if they're worth anything. And we'll see on another slide how critical that can be. And you can see there that obviously we have this, very many of these deposits are low grade. And it's worth remembering as well that these are quoted in parts per million. 1,000 parts per million sounds like a lot, but it's only grams per ton. And that is actually 1,000 parts per million is 0.1%. So if you've got a deposit that you're saying is 2,000 ppm, it's only 0.2%. And that's a very small amount of metal to be present in a ton of rock. And obviously that has implications for processing and extraction. So if we just look at cutoff grade on the next slide, please. Now, there's an extract here from East Star Resources that's got the active project here in Kazakhstan. Unfortunately, I don't think Alex Walker is here to heckle me about this particular extract, but he's quoting there the parts per million grade. But actually, he does reveal that the major rare earth oxide he's talking about is actually yttrium. So really, he's talking about an yttrium deposit with other stuff. But if people hear the word rare earth elements, maybe they're thinking it's the rare earth elements that we use in magnets. But unfortunately, it's not, or I don't think it is, according to that deposit. Now, when we look about economic concentrations of these things, for the iron absorption clays, the cutoff grade can be very low for those, as low as 0.1%. So the kind of numbers that Alex is quoting here are on point. That's what you'd expect. But if it was for a hard rock ore, which costs a bit more to process, is a bit more complex, you're looking for 1 to 5% total rare earth oxides. But obviously it does depend a lot on the value of the metals that constitute that basket that you're referring to. So it really is something to be aware of. And obviously if you've got an early stage rare earth project and you're doing a resource estimate for it, If that's a new deposit that has never been processed, never been tested, then you're going to need some metallurgical test work and some quite detailed analysis to be able to come up with an appropriate cut-off grade and to satisfy the requirement of reasonable prospects of eventual economic extraction, as we all know that is part of the JORC code and all the Crisco codes. So it's very different to some other projects like gold, for example. If you have a gold project, it's relatively easy to determine if it's going to be economic, if you can extract the gold. But as we see on the next slide about metallurgy, or the next two slides, it's a bit more complicated than that. These rare earth elements are they're not really commodities in the traditional sense. They're chemicals, and they require chemical engineering and processing to extract them. So the mine is a technical detail. The mine is a very small part about it. The complicated stuff is what you do with that. A typical hard rock ore, as we see on this slide, will need to be probably roasted, some form of heat treatment, then a leaching in some nasty chemical, and then impurity removal, and then solvent extraction to eventually get to the metal or metal oxide you're looking for. And I was told that if you wanted to theoretically extract all 17 rare earth elements from a solution, you probably need somewhere between 200 and 1,000 stages of solvent extraction, which sounds a bit ridiculous, and I think it probably is, but I don't think that you'd get all 17 in one solution anyway. But it gives an example of the complexity of processing these things. Next slide, please. Now, this is another extract from the E-Star press release, and this is an interesting thing because this is an early stage project, and he's talking about the metallurgical test work that he's going to do at an early stage to see if you can recover these rare earth elements. And look at it. I mean, I can't even say the names of some of these chemicals. And I mean, what's an acetic acid leach? I mean, is it vinegar or something? So it's clearly complicated. As many stages. If this was a gold project, we'd just do some bottle rolls in cyanide to see how it absorbed in cyanide, or some mineralogy, and you're done, right? But look at this lot, and this is the first stage. This is his initial test work from drilling out an early stage project. So I really think that illustrates the point about it being chemical engineering as opposed to mining. And this beneficiation part is really the critical thing, because that is not a simple bit of test work to do up front. So the technology input required to really produce these rare earth elements, compounds, oxides, whatever, is quite significant. Now, if you think that's bad, next slide please. There's more. Radioactivity. When you process this soup of elements to get your concentrate, whatever it is that you're trying to produce, quite often you'll come across radioactive byproducts, and you'll have to deal with those. And obviously, radioactive byproducts, radioactive waste is a hot topic in most places, and it's not a straightforward thing to deal with, and it requires expertise, and it requires people to understand exactly what the risks are and find ways to mitigate them. Now, if we just move on to the ESG considerations that are linked to this. Next slide, please. Obviously, you're going to have issues with your processing these rare earth elements. There's going to be large amounts of waste. There's going to be acids, reagents, radioactive sludge, or whatever. The processing is energy intensive. It uses all these chemicals and reagents. It's also water intensive. There's going to be challenges for waste storage, water treatment, health and safety of workers there. The local communities are not going to want to have these things anywhere near them. And obviously there's this energy, there'll be a greenhouse gas implication on the energy. So these, like all the things we need for our green energy transition, we're going to need a lot of fossil fuels to get them. And we're going to need a lot of careful thought and consideration into how we can get to a point where we're producing these sustainably. The picture there on the right is an example from Malaysia. There was a rare earths refinery opened there a few years ago by this company Lynas, and it was supposed to be, the first foot in the door of producing a sustainable rare earths industry outside of China. And the Malaysian government's shut it down because they've realized that there's radioactive byproducts, the community doesn't like it, there's contaminated water, contaminated sludge, and it's in their backyard. So it's being kicked out, and I believe they're going to move it to Australia. So hopefully they'll have more success in that jurisdiction. Now, if we just have a look at the market on the next slide, please. And I go back to my point about cut-off grade and evaluating these things, is that there's some of them are in very short supply, particularly those magnet ones that I mentioned, that people are going to need. And just a point on that magnet thing. At this conference the other week, I was told that during COVID, just because of supply chain issues, not because of geopolitical issues, but there was a shortage of magnets coming from China. And there were luxury cars produced by German manufacturers that had no electric motors in their seats to adjust the seating position because they couldn't find the electric motors and because of the magnets needed to produce those. So there's a thought for you all, is that there's some poor people driving around in high-end Mercedes that have to adjust their seats manually because of issues with rare earths. So I think we're probably going to see a bit more of that if geopolitics deteriorates further and the supplies from China become more restricted. But when you look at these elements, there's actually some of them that are produced in abundance and they're not actually in short supply. So you could have your promoter promoting his rare earths project, but which rare earths is it? Are they in short supply? But there's some of them, like yttrium, for example, that has uses in LEDs, and you can see with lighting and the way that LEDs have transformed the cost of lighting, that there's probably a very strong demand going forward for those. So maybe it's not a bad thing there's more of those produced, and that maybe more production won't decrease the price. But there is no stock exchange for these. It's not a transparent market. It's very opaque. And it's more like producer pricing, particularly in China, where these producers, they're vertically integrated. They'll actually produce mine the material and take it all the way to the compounds used in batteries or magnets or motors. Now, if we just look at the risks on the next slide, please. And I'm aware I'm running out of time, but one area I'm going to highlight about the risks is we did a recent battery metal project in southern Africa, in Botswana, and we did a scoping study for this, and this involved solvent extraction, so basically dissolving the metal in an acid and then getting a precipitate out to put straight into batteries. And at the scoping study level, when we looked at this high level, everything looked rosy. We did some lab work, and we thought the processing cost would be $200 or $300 a ton. But by the time we actually did the detailed work at feasibility level with all the stages, it came out at about $900 to $1,000 a ton. So the complexity that we discovered by looking at it in more detail was off the scale. The detail went up exponentially, and I think that's going to be a feature of these rare earth projects, is that they might look good at scoping level, but that transformation to the costs at the FS level is huge. And I would really urge companies to really have a PFS stage in the middle and do detailed scoping work before they move to a feasibility study on such a project. But it's not all bad. If we look at the opportunities on the next slide, please. And I think when we talk about the opportunities for rare earth projects, obviously the main one is all about demand. This demand is going to grow, and there will be geopolitical drivers to stimulate demand in countries outside of China. But I think from what we've seen on the previous slides, that's going to take some effort. And we don't often see a good collaboration between governments and junior mining markets, in my experience, and I'd love to see how that's going to happen and how governments can actually assist in the development of these projects, also given governments' track records around the world of operating mining companies. So, well, we'll see about that, won't we? Now, on the final slide, let's just have a look at some due diligence considerations that some people in the audience might be interested in when they look at these projects. Next slide, please. Obviously, we've got to look at the deposit type, as we've seen, and the deposit type and the size and the cut-off grade is going to be very important. The number one thing that I would encourage anyone to do with a rare earth project is to consider the metallurgical process route, and that's where the effort lies. And obviously that will give you the information you need to feed into a cut-off grade to really evaluate your deposit. So the evaluation of a rare earth deposit really depends on the metallurgy and the processing of it, and that's probably the bottom line. And you should be very aware these equivalents or total rare earth oxide grades that are quoted. And obviously this ESG, as we all know, is going to become bigger and bigger, but especially with these kinds of projects, because they're much harder to make environmentally acceptable and socially acceptable than many other kinds of mining projects. So I'd like to thank you for your attention and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Спасибо большое, Майк.
Thank you, Mike. And the next floor, the last floor, I would like to give to Mr. Kaysar Kashimuratov. He is the partner from Aurora Minerals Group. From March this year, they are promoting Kazakhstan, conducting big events. Kaysar, Q&A session depends on your speech, how fast you will be. Okay, this is my last presentation, and I would like my presentation to be positive. Just 1 month ago, we participated in PDC conference, and we conducted Kazakhstan Day. But for the first time this year, there was a great interest to Kazakhstan at this conference, and we are very happy about that. And today, we can see a lot of new faces, new companies that came for this MINEX forum. The main topic that was discussed as part of PDC, this is a global trend and the global transition and the challenges faced by the companies. The main issue was how timely the mining sector would ensure the increased demand for the mineral resources in the trend, taking into account the trends and challenges, global ones that the market is facing. We are talking about geopolitical challenges, changing of the environmental requirements and standards, and of course, this is the fight for investments between the countries. On this background, I would like to mention that Kazakhstan has made a fundamental step adopting or making such a step like adoption of subsoil code. A bit of statistics. 27 years ago, there were less than 600 countries, but during 5 years there were 2,000 licenses. It was because of the COVID restrictions. The second factor that impeding the new contracts was because of the closed areas. But today we were said that new areas were opened, and we hope for the spike of the new licenses. These 2,000 licenses, we hope that this figure will double. The second impeding factor for the investments, I will not talk about lack of data, but I will talk about limited availability and access to geological data. But the Vice Minister mentioned that they are working on the geological data, and more than 30,000 geological survey reports were downloaded to the database. But those factors that I mentioned, they were limited factors. What reforms we are having in the country? The environmental code was adopted, the tax code that will be adopted this year, and the promotion of those reforms that are going on in the mining sector. Actually, we need to raise awareness about all these reforms using all the global platforms and exhibitions like PDC and others. This year, there was a big delegation from Kazakhstan at this exhibition, PDC, and all the delegates mentioned that it was important for the sector. A bit of statistics. Before the adoption of the code, we had limited number of big players, small companies, but for the last 5-6 years, we can see that those companies that are already present in the market or planning to enter this market, we have the increased number of them. In Toronto and Australian Stock Exchange, more than 1,000 companies listed there. And for Kazakhstan, it is important to attract as many of these companies as possible, those companies, big players that are listed in the Stock Exchange of Australia and others. Another aspect, Kazakhstan conducted legal reform we used the Western Australia experience and best practices, but if we are why Western Australia is successful, it's not just because of the beautiful legislation, but the geological service is very successful in Australia. They have make this geological database open for public, and you can extract a lot of useful information from this database, and you can make investment decisions just by utilizing these web portals and database. If we want to use the Western Australia experience, then we need to use the best practices of geological service in Australia. Just to comment, geological service, they are dealing with mapping, geophysical maps. Geological service is also storing, they are providing storage capacities, keeping all the geological samples for future generations. Another important factor, geological service of Australia, they are not doing drillings per se, but they are motivating drilling by compensating risks of subsoil users if they are drilling at not surveyed areas. That's why we need to use these best practices of Australian Geological Service. Talking about the geological service of the world, all the leading geological service of the world from Australia, Canada, Latin America, African continent, so they are actively using regional geological surveys to attract investments to the sector. As part of PDC, we could see a lot of country pavilions. The main things presented by the companies, these are modern geological data, and the colleagues, our delegates, they saw it. That's why for Kazakhstan it's important to do the same. Very often we can hear that whether the code is effective. Skeptics, 5 years after the adoption of the code, the skeptics are expecting for the results of the implementation of this code, but it's not possible. Out of these 5 years, so for 2 years we were experiencing COVID, but no matter what, we can see the economic effects of the new code. First of all, these are taxations, bonuses, payments paid to the local budgets, new jobs created, increase of the GDP due to the increase of the services provided to the subsoil users. For the last 5 years, we have new service companies established, drilling companies, geophysical companies, but the most important factor is that we have the increased opportunity or chances to open new deposits. And if we have new deposits opened, these are another economic effect for the countries. That's why we have to think about that. And the last slide, Aurora Minerals Group. We associated the success of our company with the success of the code. We mentioned that many new companies, service companies, were established. 5 years ago, there were just 5 of us. Now there are 200 of us. This is the output of the code. Now our company is providing the whole spectrum, the whole range of services. Our airborne geophysics, geological consultancy, diamond and RC drilling. So that's why let's remain positive. This is a unique time for the country to attract more investments. That's why with this positive note, let me finish my speech, taking into account that new areas were opened for surveys. I hope that this exhibition, this forum will be successful as well. We have our pavilion here also. If you have additional questions, please approach our pavilion. Thanks for your attention. Kaysar, thank you very much. Thank you very much. What I propose, we have just one question please, delegates of the forum, you can ask questions to the ministry or what. I would like to ask the question. Do you plan to increase the staff of the ministry, especially for the Department for Subsoil Users? Because it was mentioned that it's crucial to have enough staff in the governmental bodies to serve the subsoil users' requests. Thank you that you are concerned about our staffing. Yes, there is a problem. Increasing staff for the department is the issue that we are discussing. It's in our agenda. I hope that by the end of this year we'll resolve that, but not as was mentioned by Timur. He mentioned 60 staff, but we understand our limitations. We will increase our staff, but we will increase it by 5-6 people for the department. I know that a long time is spent for the agreement and so on and so forth. But we understand that it shouldn't be the problem for the subsoil users. All our internal issues we are facing, it should be our internal ones, not reflecting the subsoil users. But we are quite open. If we do not have time to consult every subsoil user, every week what we do, we conduct Zoom meetings. You can join these Zoom conferences. You can request to join our Zoom meeting, and every Friday at 4 o'clock p.m. So we conduct these Zoom meetings, and we can have a large number of participants in this meeting.
Everyone is invited. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your consideration and support for and understanding that our resources are limited. We'll take effort to resolve this issue. And one more question, if it is possible. Kasink. I would like to say that we have opportunity and so as to get geological permits. It's a difficult procedure, and that prevents us from doing our business. And unfortunately, the quality of sound is very poor, that does not allow the translation. Thank you for your question. Well, I'm aware of this problem, and we have discussed this problem with you and with the sector. It is a huge problem, but now I hope my colleagues from the Ministry of Environment will forgive me. We have an opposition between the real economic sectors and our colleagues, ecologists. I would like to tell you that our problem has been noticed. There were some reforms in the environmental sector. We got a new environmental code, but it actually did not make the life of real economic sector simpler, but created even more difficulties. During field season, one field season can be lost for coordination of the document. We have established an interagency group on this issue. I would like to say that we'll have difficulties due to the Ministry of Environment is protecting the interest of ministry. But I think we'll find the balance through appropriate changes and amendments, and we are taking efforts to resolve this issue. Colleagues, in terms of environmental issue, one good news. that you have raised this issue. Yesterday, we had a conference call with the Minister of Environment. We also had the representative of the Minister of Industry and Development, and we discussed the issues at early stage of geological survey. Just holes drilling should be turned to a third category of activities. The Committee on Ecology, as far as understood, will submit a draft document to all territorial departments. So as neither screening nor agency and EIA were not prescribed for ordinary drilling. And the last question I would like to ask it with regard of regulatory policy of the Ministry of Industry with regard of subsoil uses, because it concerns us a lot. And it is also an issue of revision of previous subsoil use contracts that have been extended due to objective reasons, and maybe a non-full compliance with license and contract conditions. And the same issue of regulatory policies goes for licensing.
Many of you received notifications in January this year. If you comment on that, it would be very useful for us. Okay, thank you for this question. So it's a very sensitive issue. So maybe almost all of you faced these challenges in terms of execution, so implementation of the subsoil use proprietary rights through social production companies. All of you heard that the supervisory bodies conducted their control inspections, and certain violations were identified. The first one, low implementation, low execution of the contract obligations. So there were a lot of complaints. Why you revoking the subsoil use right? We are executing the contract, maybe not fully but partially. Why you are revoking our contract? Just object to that. We have more than 500,000 contracts at the moment of the inspection. Out of them, 300 subjects or companies, they were executing their contract obligations less than 100%. We didn't revoke all the 300 contracts. For all the 300 contracts, we had hearings, and we listened to the objective reasons for non-execution of the contract obligations, because all the deposits are different. Every case is unique. We conducted 300 negotiations after these inspections, and only 112 contracts with very grave non-execution issues, less than 30%, only those contracts were terminated. Just one message here, colleagues, if the execution is ongoing, if the contract and license obligations are implemented, you should not be scared. You should not be afraid of those contracts that were awarded through SPK, social production companies. Actually, our intention is to continue working even with non-executing companies. That's why don't worry. Talking about penalties, you all received notifications. Please give it back. So you don't understand why. So I'm a good executor. But just to mention again, we didn't revoke any one contract or one license because of the penalties. We revoked some of the contracts and licenses just because of non-execution of obligations, contract or license ones. So that's why we didn't revoke contract or licenses just because of the penalties. That's what I would like to tell you and inform you. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. With this optimistic note, I propose to complete the first session. After the coffee break, we invite all the participants for the second session.